Welcome. This is the BackendBear podcast, where we discuss anything related to programming, algorithms, and the latest practices in the coding world. So sit back, grab a drink, enjoy it, and let's dig right into it. Hello there, how's it going, people? Hope you're having a great start of the week, and you're programming hard, solving problems, and can't wait for Friday to come in. Well, today, like promised, I'm going into more technical stuff, so I'll be exploring the world of naming. This is a really important topic in the software development world. Good names can go a long way, and your code will look way cleaner, believe me. If you write good enough names of your properties, methods, classes, so on and so forth, there would be no need for any comments. And it's not only a cleanliness thing, it is also a team effort. As you will see, no two naming conventions are the same. This entire podcast episode was inspired by the Clean Code book written by Robert C. Martin, or otherwise known as the development community as Uncle Bob. If you haven't read this book, I suggest you do so. It helped me a lot in my programming career, and it kind of boosted it. There's a story about me and the Clean Code book. And when I started working at my first company, we were building a single-page application. Before I can submit any code, they gave me the book, told me, read it from cover to cover. When you're done, then you can submit your code. And at the time, I was a cocky developer, Mr. Know-It-All, and I thought the world was my oyster. After reading that book, I figured out how much I didn't know at all. And thanks to them, I learned the art of clean coding, and it kind of allowed me to grow, and it allowed me to work with a team of 40 people, 40 different developers. Also, in this episode, I will try to share some of my experiences and what I've dealt with clean code and bad code and how I approached it, beside the things that are suggested in the Clean Code book. So without further ado, grab my paw and let's explore the world of naming. So let's kick it up with intention. Names should reveal intention. Don't get me wrong, choosing good names takes time. It takes away time from the development, I know, but it saves so much time, believe me. You should always, when you're writing your code, if you're asking yourself questions, then you're doing something wrong. Questions like context, questions like why it exists, what it does, and how it is used. So when you read a variable or when you read a method name and you're confused and you're asking yourself questions, those are the signs of bad code. You should do some refactoring, renaming, and brush it up. So next time you jump into the same piece of code, you'll understand what's going on. It'll be easier for you to debug, add features, and so on and so forth. If you're ever catching yourself adding comments, you're doing it wrong. So if you need comments to explain your bad naming, then you're doing it wrong. The name should reveal intent. So you should understand the context out of the name. What would be a good name for a variable? Let's say, for example, that would be number of moves, days since paid, days left, current month number, current month year, something along those lines. So you immediately know when you read the name of the variable is current month number, it's current month number. And you don't need to dig any deeper. If you named it something short, CMN or something like that, you will be confused. It will take you a second to understand what that variable represents. What would be a bad example of a bad name? That would be like the list, temp, difference. When you see a name like difference between what? So immediately notice that I'm asking myself a question. Difference between what? So it takes me time to go through the code and figure it out. If I put difference in heights, okay, that will be good. Difference in student heights, okay, that would be even better. So immediately I know what's going on inside that variable. And also, don't be afraid to refactor your old code. I'm doing that constantly. When I'm working on some issue and I just pass by bad code, I will fix it, especially if it's mine. If it's not mine, then I'll talk to the developer, but it's another story. But don't be afraid, to talk to other people. Don't be afraid to refactor your old code. Don't be afraid to approach it with fresh eyes. Sometimes you can't think of a good name. Next time you pass by, you'll have a better, once you clear out your head, you'll have a better name. Then the next thing we need to think about is avoiding disinformation. So you should avoid ambiguous names or names that obscure the true meaning of the word. Misleading names are really bad. For example, you name a variable product list, but it's actually not a list. It's an object that has items and that has some other logic attached to it. Immediately, that should be a red flag because you probably didn't name your class the right way, or you need to rename the property because it's not the list. Technically, you're not dealing with the list. Don't use closely spelled names. So let's say current date and current day. So visually they look similar and they are closely spelled. So you might mix them up. Here you're dealing with current date, and then here you're dealing with current day. Or other example would be current date and current date time. So that kind of confuses you. So you're asking yourself like, okay, current date is current date, but what is current date time? Does it represent the current time, but not the current date? But what does the current date represent? Because date time kind of holds both of them. So I'm kind of going back and forth. I'm confusing myself because I named the variables wrong. Then you need to revise and look at your variable names a bit more closely so you would understand them. That kind of brings me to my next point. Think of the time it takes you to understand the word. So let's take the example of current date and current day. So in order to understand the difference between those two, I need to read the entire word. And there have studies been done about people and reading and how they understand stuff. Usually people, what they do is understand shapes. So if the words are kind of similarly shaped, like current date and current day, you might get confused because you're reading fast, right? And also the time it takes you to understand the word. So the less time it takes you to understand the difference between those two, the better. Because in order to understand that something is current date, you need to read the entire first word current and then date, and then current and then day. So basically on the last letter, you can understand the difference between those two. If it was named date current and day current, you would understand it better. In the first three letters, you understand the difference between those two. So that's what I mean by the amount of time it takes you to understand a variable. Because when you're glossing over code, speed is of the essence. Because there are a lot of methods. You don't want to stick around and understand each one individually. You just want to glance over and understand the context right then and there. You don't need to dive deep into the code, but you just need to know like an overview. What is it doing? Okay, this method is adding two numbers. This method is configuring some settings. This method is wondering what the difference between two heights of two students are, and so on and so forth. And do I have a story for you with misleading names? And this happened a couple of days ago. So I was reviewing code from one of the developers that's no longer in the company. And I ran into a method named as max client ID. And then I ran into the second method, which was named as max asset ID. So your first thought is like, okay, based on the name, is determining if it's some kind of if it's a maxed out ID. Maybe there are rules and limitations of how you're IDing your stuff. And I'll be like, okay, cool. Once I dived into it, then I saw that one method was counting characters in a string. And it only returned true if there was only one character in the entire string. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. So this is just counting characters in a string, and it's returning true only if a string has one character in it. So everything else has to be something other than character, numbers or something like that, or special characters. It's not even specifying. So there's no common, there's no nothing in the thing, of course. So then I was like, okay, this is a bit confusing. I'll have to do some mental mapping with this. And then I looked at the other method. Other method was named as max asset ID, and then the only thing it was doing a try parse inside. It was a void method. It wasn't returning the value. It was just doing a try parse of the string, and then it returned true if it's not a string, if it's an integer. And then also on top of that, it was throwing an exception. It was so a try catch, and then inside of it is a try parse. And I was completely baffled by it, so it didn't make any sense whatsoever. It took me 2 days of code digging to figure it out, because I just made a mental note in my mind, like, okay, these two methods are doing that. Why are they doing that? I don't even know, but I'm going to find out. So I was digging through a lot of like legacy code, and it's an old application that we're revitalizing and moving, to the cloud. This is more of an in-house tool that we're developing. So we weren't that careful with coding that solution, apparently. But which brings my point. You need to have clean code everywhere. You need to, even in your in-house tools, they need to be clean, because someone else might jump in and you might no longer be in the company. You get hit by a car. What's going to happen? Who's going to take over? So it needs to be like understandable. But anyway, so after 2 days, I figured out what the problem was. And the problem was that there's something called a maximizer product. That was a third-party tool that we used. And the only way to determine if something is a maximizer ID was if it had one character in it, which still is not correct. I mean, maximizer ID, just coincidentally, it had that shape of ID. But what the method was doing was kind of combining the IDs we already have, and then based on that, trying to determine if it's an ID that we are using internally, or is it an ID the third-party software is using. So just by the sheer explanation of this, you see it's way too convoluted, but way too unnecessary. And it's like mixing and matching stuff that don't even belong together. Next point I would like to bring up is group naming. And group naming is also kind of considered bad. So for example, let's say you have an address city, address name, address zip code, country, and stuff like that. And you name them like that: address city, address name, address zip code. And you're passing them along through methods and all that jazz. Why not create a class instead? Because you're already kind of creating some kind of a group, logical or contextual group. Why not create a class instead and put all those properties inside? So then you have a class name address, which inside it has a city, name, zip code. Also imagine if you didn't have a class and you pass those parameters in some other methods. So you have a method that has like 3, 4, 5 parameters. And now you're at the point, okay, I need to add a new parameter for the address. So we missed the county, for example. So we have the country, we have the zip code, the name, the city. We missed the county. So we need to expand that. So you have to go through all of the methods and all of the signatures of the methods and change the number of parameters it has. What if instead you had that class address inside? You wouldn't care for it, because then every method would have that class inside, and you can add in the class itself a new parameter. If you need a specific logic inside of every method, you can access that and assign the values, and it'll just save you the amount of build that you need to do and code changes that you need to do in order to add one parameter. So you kind of get 2 birds with 1 stone. And believe me, your code is going to be way cleaner if you start doing that. My next point is, don't use noisy names. Noisy, like sound, noisy. And what would we consider a noisy name? And you've heard the example before with current date and current date time and current day. Those are noisy names when you look at them, because they are way too kind of similar, and at the end of the string, you figure out what the true meaning of that variable is. Also, for example, a lot of people do like company names or some special acronym that defines something and then starts dumping in variables underneath that. So imagine like Amazon, I don't know, Amazon first name, Amazon last name, Amazon address, and so on and so forth. What happens is in your IDEs, when you're doing the lookup of a variable, you have to type in Amazon, then it shows you a huge list of variables, and you have to type in more just to find that one variable that you're looking for. As soon as that list starts growing, you'll start losing yourself. So names should be unique. Besides being noisy, they should be visually unique as well and easy for you to find. It's not possible all the time, but you need to try it. And the more you kind of pay attention to it, the better your code is. For example, number of dates and num of dates is also considered a noisy name, because if you, in the same scope, if you see like number of dates and num of days, they look similar besides the number part as well, and the date and day, and it's just, when you're reading fast, you're kind of losing yourself. You have to stop, then go back, then look more closely, and then you'll understand the names of the variables. One more bad thing is the number series naming. That's especially notorious in the methods. Let's say you have I1 and then I2 as parameters in the method, and then I3 equals I1 plus I2, and then you return I3. So now when I'm saying it out loud, you understand like, oh, okay, this is doing sum of two numbers. But why just not name the properties and the variables what they truly are? So adder1, adder2, result, return result, or sum, even better, return sum or resulting sum or something along those lines. So as you're reading it, you would understand what the hell is going on. I know we're all in a hurry, but take some time to name your properties accordingly. What would also be considered a noisy name? Filler words, for example. Let's say you name a variable a customer's list, or the customer's list, or something along those lines. Or imagine having in the same scope a customer's list, the customer's list, and the customer list. What's the difference between the three? Were you lazy so you couldn't figure out a name and then added the? How should I tell the difference between those three? Customer list, out of those three examples, customer list is the most like reasonable example. But even that, for me, would be a bad name. I would name customers. And it's nice, it's short, it's sweet, and just you understand the context right away. Do not use redundant words. Redundant words are also considered noisy names. So let's say you have date string. So it represents some kind of a date and some kind of and string as the type. And especially in C# and in Java, you know the return type right then and there. And IDE is helping you with the return type of that variable or property. So there's no need to add the string. Just keep it, short and sweet. Variable should also be considered a filler noisy name. So if you name, I don't know, date variable, it's kind of redundant. So you already know it's a variable, so why name it like that? Also, I mentioned with list, like customer list and customers. You already know it's a list as a return type, but when you name it customers, you already know it's some kind of a collection of something. So you don't need to specify exactly a list. I'm guilty of using, by the way, the word list, and I'm trying to fix that lately, but every once in a while I catch myself naming something like customer list, and then I switch it to customers. But all habits die hard, but with persistent, I'll avoid that in the future, and my property names would look way better than they are now. So let's talk about a length a bit. Length of a variable should be short and sweet. But don't be afraid to make them long if it needed to be. Don't be afraid to make them long for the sake of brevity. Just don't put filler words, but don't over-explain yourself. This is also one of the things I'm dealing with one of the developers. They're constantly overcomplicating the names and the comments and everything. So I'm trying to tone it down. Kind of feel bad after a while because I'm making them take away the work they did. But for the sake of clarity and for the sake of brevity, it's better to shorten up those names. Think about it for a second. Just don't put an entire paragraph in the name. Long gone are those days when we were limited with the amount of space we had for variables. Now, let's talk about pronounceable names. What are pronounceable names? Well, as the word says, names that you can pronounce. Like Uncle Bob said in his book, Clean Code. That was fabulous. It made me laugh. I had to write it down. If you can't pronounce it, you can't discuss it without sounding like an idiot. Which to me is hilarious. Like, so just imagining meeting, you came in the team, and the first meeting they're talking about nav the TC. You'll be like, what? I'll be like, nav the TC. And you're like, spell it. And then I spell it to you. NOFDTC. First of all, my accent and the way I pronounce things are different than yours. So there's a misunderstanding between the two of us. On top of that, because it's abbreviated, you don't know what the hell is it abbreviated from. And you don't want to feel stupid asking, like, what is this short for? So if I tell you that NOFDTC is number of days till Christmas, you'll be like, oh, okay, then it makes sense. And after that, you would know what that variable stands for. But that's my point. If I need to discuss it with you, I need to explain it to you, that's wasted time. Why just not write number of days till Christmas? Every time a new developer comes in, you would have to explain the acronyms to that developer. So try to, make the name longer. It's easier to understand for the developer. Also, there's a problem between languages and different cultures. And they have a harder time understanding what the abbreviation is for because they're not a native speaker. I'm not a native speaker. And I don't think, ever since I got to the States, I don't think I ever been in a company that had a team that was consisted of only English-speaking developers. So the entire world is working together on the code. I don't think there's a single person that is from the same place in a team. We're from all different walks of life. So our understanding of those abbreviations are different than yours. And our abbreviations mean something different. Remember the max and the maximizer example? That's exactly what happened to me. I went through the thing. I didn't understand the business logic of it. And it took me like a couple of days to understand it. But I shouldn't be concerned with that because I was not on the task to change the business logic. I was on the task to, create a better application or better software. So I was digging in code, not in business logic. Those abbreviations will work 90% of the time. Max and min, for example, are one of the more common ones. You understand what is a max and a min. But like I said, remember the max and maximizer example that I gave you, which happened to me. Sometimes it can turn really bad, and that wasted time on understanding stuff is wasted development time. I should be coding somewhere else. So, and that kind of brings me to another point. We need to write clean code and have good naming so it would save us time to debug stuff. The less time we spend debugging stuff, the more time we have for the actual development. When you're creating your code, if you're catching yourself doing mental mapping, then it's also a sign of bad naming. And what do I mean by mental mapping? Well, the most common example is when you see like one letter variables, which are I, J, and K. And my upbringing, and probably yours, most commonly used is for indexing of some sort. So you're indexing through some list. So you're using I, J, and K just to loop through that. If you keep that I, J, and K on a class level, if you hold that indexer, that's bad practice. If you even keep it locally, it's bad practice. Why not name it like row, column, count, or something like that, so you would know, like, okay, I'm accessing a row of a certain table or a column, or I'm counting certain items in a list. I know we're all in a hurry. It saves you time. You just write it down and you worry about it later. But believe me, you need to pay attention to those things, especially if you're leaving them outside of the method you wrote. What is a scope, by the way? So we haven't discussed topic of scope. Most of you know this, but the scope is just a code block that is executing in memory. So after that scope, usually the variables are disposed. So in C#, we have the garbage collector. Even in Java, there are certain garbage collectors. So of course, you always have to clean up after yourself, especially when you're dealing with complex objects. But when I'm referring to a scope, I'm referring to a small code block that is kind of executing in its own way. So even in C#, you can use using keyword to contain a scope of a variable. Also, with the mental mapping, what you're doing is that you're telling yourself that I is row, J is column, K is count. So you're going down the code, right? And then you get distracted, and we always get distracted. You get that Twitter message, you get that Facebook message, someone calls you on the phone or someone calls you over, and you get back into the code, and then you lost track what IJK is, especially if it's a long-ass method. You don't know where you are or what you're doing. So then you have to scroll back up, scroll down, scroll back up, scroll down. So you're kind of going back and forth nonstop. So that is bad. You should, when someone is reading your code, it should be read from the top down. You don't need to go back up. It's just like reading an article. So if you're bouncing up and forth, back and forth, you're doing mental mapping. Next thing I would like to talk about is the notation, code, ethics, and naming. So there are certain ways you can name variables, certain names you can name classes, methods, properties, so on and so forth. And that should be a team effort. There hasn't been a team that I worked on that had the same code ethics and naming. And like I said, every company has different rules. When you jump into a company, and if they have a nice system of code ethics and naming, it'll take you a couple days maybe to get used to it, but then you'll start writing code the same way they do. At home, when you're working on your own projects, you can write it any way you like. But, make it a team effort, and the rules should be strict, and everyone should abide by them. And one of the more popular notations is the Hungarian notations. But no one implements it truly. Not truly, but no one implements it to the fullest. Everyone is grabbing some rules here and there and not naming the same way. So there are two types of Hungarian notation. There's the system one, where you have like prefixes which tell you the data type, like string or int. So let's say int num of days, or int number of days would be more correct, but you get the point. It's like str first name. So you kind of created an acronym for string, and the return type. I personally don't like those, so I'm enforcing my team not to put return types in the names, but that's one example of the system Hungarian notation. There's also something called like apps Hungarian notation, when instead of putting like the return type or the property type in the name, you put purpose in a name. And what would be a purpose? So imagine RW position, which would kind of represent like a row position. So as you can see, and what I explained throughout this episode, is that I'm kind of different on that. I don't like the pure Hungarian notation, but I like some of the aspects. what is my notation and what I tell my developers to do and how I like to code things as in scope, inside of a scope, for the local variables, I use a lowercase name. For private variables in a class, on a class level, I like to start them with the underscore. Public variables, I like always uppercase. Methods, I always name with an uppercase, and so on and so forth. You get the picture. But I set those rules, and we kind of set them in teams. So everyone in team codes that way. It might be different than what you like, but like I said, it's better to make it a team effort because we're all cogs in the machine, and everyone needs to jump into your code, and you need to jump into my code, and you need to understand what's going on inside. And let's talk about interfaces a bit. I haven't touched that topic, but interfaces, personally, I like to name them with the capital I and then the name of the interface. And what does that do? To me, as soon as I see the I, I'm like, okay, this is an interface. And I know the technical workings already inside. So I know it's a contract. So I know there must be a class that inherits from that interface. But there are changes to that rule. When I'm shipping an interface to the client, let's say you have some kind of an application that you ship an interface to the client, but then based on some situation or some parameters, you create a different instance that inherits from that interface. Then I don't like to ship to a client something named with I something. So let's say, for example, I consumer service, right? Instead, I would give them the name of consumer service. And why is that? Because to them, I don't need to reveal the inner workings of my software to the client. I just need to give them, like, here's a class or something that has these methods inside. You just need to use those, and I'll take care of everything the rest. How is it an interface? Is it a concrete implementation? The client doesn't need to know that. So that's personally how I like to approach those interfaces. Let's talk about class names also. So now that we touched the topic of interfaces, let's also talk about class names. They should have like a noun or a noun-like phrase names. So what would be a good example of a class name? That would be like an address, person, account, and a setter. So also you need to avoid similar names. So let's, for example, have a class named customer, and then also customer information and customer data and customer details. So you have 4 classes that are kind of similarly named, and you're like confused. Which one is which? Where do I need to store the property? And probably that's a problem where all of these classes kind of have to be merged together. And I remember when I first started, I had the specific example. I had like customer and then customer information or customer details. I think it was customer details. So inside of a customer, I had customer details. And then I was confusing, the inner class and the outer class. But the developer, the lead at the time, they wanted to make a separation between these are details that are fetched from the outside source, and these are our details that we're dealing with, which is a bad choice. You should have created your own class with your own data and not introducing the third-party details into your own class. So just create properties that you need and keep it simple. Avoid verbs in class name. For example, you name it a customer generator, or customer generator is also like a noun-like name, but generate customer. So let's say a class that only deals with generating of the customer. It sounds more like that would be something part of the customer class. The way I see classes is some kind of a data container. So there are data points inside, and then I'm accessing, and then there are methods that it's kind of doing. So, and every class should deal with one thing. So as soon as you start introducing verbs and multiple nouns in it, and you're probably doing something wrong because you're giving multiple responsibilities to a single class. Probably it has to be separated in some way and revised. So now that we touched a bit about methods, let's talk about method names. And method names should have a verb-like names. So let's say, for example, a good name would be like save, import, send message, and try to stick to like one abstract concept per word, or one word per abstract concept. Let me put it like that. What do I mean by that? Let's say you want to get the customer data. So you would name the method get customer data or set customer data. But there are different ways of naming get. So English language is beautiful, and there are multiple ways of saying the same thing. So you would say get customers, you can say fetch customers, you can say retrieve customers, and so on and so forth. So all of them kind of have the same meaning. Try to keep that consistent. And that's what I mean by concept. So abstract concept. So if you're getting the data, always name it get. Don't mix and match like get, fetch, retrieve, and so on and so forth. So get customer data, get address, get location, and so on and so forth. It is also a team decision. That's also one of the code ethics that should be in that document. And by the way, when you're doing the code ethics meeting, it should take you about a half an hour to explain all of the rules, and then it should be easy peasy for every developer jumping in. But you get the point. So it should be a team decision on how you're also naming your methods. What verbs are you using? What words are you using? And so on and so forth. Let's say, for example, you have a class, but you have different ways of constructing it. So you need multiple different constructors. And in C#, you say new customer, then in brackets, you put all sorts of parameters that you need inside of that class. So let's say you need to create a customer from, in one case, you need to create from a social security number, and you'll pass a string, which is a social security number. And in the other case, you need to pass it from ID number, which is also a string. So let's say you have constructor with, you cannot create two constructors that have the same signature, right? One string inside. So then inside of that, you need to handle like, oh, is it a social security number or is it an ID number? So you need to kind of check the format. So why just not create two different methods that would return the instance of the class? So just inside of the class of customer, just create a method that would return an instance of a customer that would be named create from social security number. So you have a nice name that immediately you know, okay, this is a creating instance of a social security number. And then create from ID number, another method inside of the class. So you know that it's creating class from the ID number. When you're just using the constructor, you're not sure, like, oh, is it, what am I sending in or not? Or so there are all sorts of bugs that you can introduce because of that. Next, and this is a big topic, and this, like I had my run-ins with this, I'm a bit more professional and a strict person, I know, but don't be cute in code. Everyone loves puns. I super love puns, especially the bad ones. So if you have any puns that you can recommend, please send them at marco@backendbear.com. I super love puns, but I don't like them in code. What would you think if you run into a method named Holy Diver or Finding Emo? I mean, hilarious. One is like a fabulous song, but D.O., the other one is, Finding Nemo, but Finding Emo, and then, all sorts of puns inside. So it's fun. I mean, it is fun. I admit it, but hear me out. Think about the audit of the code, especially in my doing with a lot of sensitive customer data. Our code is audited and reviewed, and we go through all sorts of processes. So imagine yourself explaining it either to your manager or to HR or to the auditors themselves, explaining why you name your method Holy Diver or Finding Nemo, right? And both, when I think about it, both of those functions should be some badass search functions, searching for something, But anyway, it's not so funny when you're trying to explain it to someone. And also, which brings me to another thing. No one has the same sense of humor. what was funny last year might be outrageous today. Then you're also risking of being called in by the HR and then needed to change the code because you thought you were being funny, but then all of a sudden you insulted someone. So just don't try to be cute. And if you're explaining it to someone, then it's wasted time. So if you're stopping from whatever you were doing, you need to explain to someone else in order to understand what the method is and how it is. No matter how funny it is, it's wasted time. Your names should also be technical. I know we're tempted to name our methods and properties more businessy-like, but you should always strive for a technical more name. Why is that? Because your code is being viewed by programmers and being used by other programmers. So if they jump in, if it's some kind of a term that a programmer would understand, it will be easier for them to navigate through. So let's say, for example, you use a design pattern and naming of your class. So you named it customer factory. You would know right then and there that, okay, this is a factory. Okay, so now I have, abstract factory, I have concrete factory, I have the product that is being built, and so on and so forth. So a programmer knows right away. If you name them something like businessy, it's like customer evaluation. I don't know why I'm obsessed with customer in this podcast, but if you name them something more businessy like, then they would have a hard time understanding that. Not a hard time, but it will take them to dig in and then understand, oh, this is a factory class and this is a factory design pattern, so I know how to navigate through this. When you're naming your methods, classes, properties, all of that, try to give it a more technical name first and then fall back to a businessy name, or matching both of them. I mean, your code is not going to be read by the managers or business people. It's going to be read by programmers. And I know, finding the right balance is an art form almost, and it takes some practice and takes some time to get used to. And I think I blabbered on enough. Let's bring it to a bit of a conclusion on my end. And you should try to apply some of these lessons at least, if not all. I think you're going to see results right away. You need to take some time into naming your properties, methods, functions, and classes. Just take some time. Believe me, it saves way more time than it takes you to think of a good name for a class. I know, it takes away from the development, but believe me, it saves way more time. When you're writing your code, do not write a code that just compiles and call it a day. Just create a code that compiles, that works, that is testable. Write a class or a program, write a program that is readable. So you're going to get back to it. We're human. We're making bugs here and there. We all make mistakes. So we need to get back into that code later down the road. Just write clean code. And when you look at software development to me personally is like an art form. Just try and imagine two writers who have the task of writing the same novel. Those two novels would not be the same because they have different metaphors, different ways of expressing themselves. Yes, the story would be the same, the same characters and the same ending and the same plot twist, but the way they do that would be different, the way they get there. And that's the basis of clean code in a way. You need to find those metaphors that are common between us so all of us would understand what's going on inside. The sky's the limit. You can write anything you want and anything that you can think of. With today's technology, like I said, the sky's the limit. You can write whatever you want, and that's the beauty of programming. Don't be afraid to speak up when you run into bad code or bad naming. Talk to your team members. Talk to the developer at hand. Also, bear in mind that that's a bad... Bad pun there. Bear in mind. But even when you run into bad code, don't raise a ruckus right away. Stop, think. What I always try to tell my developers, even when you run into bad code, there must be a reason for it. So try doing a bit of research. Try talking to a developer. There surely must be a reason for the way they wrote that code. It can be they were in a hurry, or there were a deer in the headlights. They couldn't think of a solution any other way, so they thought of that solution. Also, it might be that you might be wrong. You're not seeing some things. Because of that, you think the code is bad. Maybe some revision of just tweaking a name here and there would make the code more readable and make it right. So communication is the key. You should always talk to other people when you're developing. You should always talk to the people above you. You should always talk to people who are below you in the chain. We're all working together on the same product and respect everyone the same way. Your names should only have one goal, and one goal only, and that is to send a message to the person who's reading it. So the person who's reading it needs to understand why the things are going on there the way they are. So whenever you're writing code, try to think, if a person didn't know anything about what I'm writing here, would they understand this? So it can be a small method. It can be a small snippet of code. Always try to think of the other person coming in behind you. And with that being said, thank you for taking a stroll with me today through the naming forest. Hope it was as enjoyable and fun to listen to as it was enjoyable for me to make. Let me know the sound quality, if it's good or bad. I'm still trying things out and setting it up. I think I finally found a setup that I like. But please, feel free, message me anytime you want. Marco@BackendBear.com, and I'll try to reply as soon as possible. And that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope I'll see you next time. I also hope that you're having a great productive week. You do a lot of coding, a lot of code reviews. Enjoy and have fun. And until next time, ta-da.